I've noticed over the last number of years that ESL, like every other industry, has had its fair share of polemic, and native speakerism seems to be it. I have my own views on that topic, and in this video I'll expand on them a little bit more. If you need extra help with your CELTA course, or if you're preparing for a language exam such as IELTS or the Cambridge Advanced or the Cambridge Proficiency, please contact me for consultations at fergustrainer@gmail.com. That's fergustrainer@gmail.com. I look forward to hearing from you. Hello there, my name is Fergus Fadden and I am a CELTA English language teacher, trainer, as well as a YouTuber. If this is your first time to the channel, I do hope you hit that subscribe button if indeed you find this video and the rest of my content useful. So on with today's video. Today, I wanted to do a reaction video to a YouTube video which I watched recently myself. It's a conversation between JordanBPeterson and linguist John McWhorter. Now later on in this video, they do focus on some social issues, which I'm not really going to get into today. I'm going to focus on the first 10 or 15 minutes of the video, where they focus their conversation on linguistics. The world of ESL and English language teaching is quite influenced by linguistics, and so I thought it would be quite relevant to the content of this channel. Also, I thought it raised some really interesting point on what I see as the myth of native speakerism. I've noticed over the last number of years that ESL, like every other industry, has had its fair share of polemic, and native speakerism seems to be it. I have my own views on that topic, and in this video I'll expand on them a little bit more. So before we jump into the video, I just want to give a little bit of background on who these two speakers are, just in case any of you are new to them. JordanBPeterson is extremely famous. Some may say for controversial reasons, but he has been a renowned professor here in Canada for a number of decades. I should say Canada and the United States, and he's known the world over for his book writing, his teaching, his speaking tours, his online presence, which is enormous. And John McWorther is a renowned linguistics academic in his own right. A little bit more on his background, he also talks quite a bit on free speech and cancel culture. So in September 2020, McWorther wrote an article in The Atlantic titled "Academics are really worried about their freedom," in which he argued that academic freedom in universities was under threat from cancel culture, pointing to evidence that the heterodox academy and his personal experience of receiving missives since May 2020 almost daily from professors living in constant fear for their career because their opinions are incompatible with the current woke playbook. Now, this is something I must admit that I have noticed creeping into our industry of English as a second language. I can see it in institutions like the British Council, where there are full lesson plans around very progressive agenda items such as climate change, feminism. Now, some of you watching this video may say, well, of course, Fergus, these things are no-brainers. To which I would respond, it was only a few years ago, less than 10, I would say 5 or 6, when most CELTA trainers, if they saw anybody bringing in religion or politics or anything that would be in any way divisive into their lesson material or building a lesson plan around it, we would always advise trainee teachers that this simply wasn't our job. There was, of course, a place for those discussions. In no way was anybody trying to prohibit anybody's speech. But the point was, your job was to be a language teacher. So your priority was to teach grammar, lexis, pronunciation, teach the skills of reading, writing, speaking, and listening. Of course, those skills and language systems always lived within a context which we tried to make as relatable as possible to the real world. But now we can see that the context and the point of view on the real world is taking pride of place over the student's linguistic development and language acquisition. Moreover, now with polemics around questions such as native speakerism, you can see the level of emotion, outrage, anger, really building in the types of commentaries that one reads on a more or less a daily basis. I even read an article recently posted on LinkedIn about how a teacher had won, and I quote, a 4-digit amount of money. I think the writer meant a 4-figure sum. And a 4-figure, that means less than 9,999, but more than 999. Anyway, for a case that they brought against a school's hiring policy, which focused on hiring native speaker teachers. Now, my whole point of view on this is the schools aren't discriminatory in and of themselves. They're just responding to the age-old crux of economics, which is supply and demand. Focusing on the word there, demand. Where does the demand come from? The demand comes from the students. The students say, I want a teacher who is a native speaker. And this relates perfectly to the question of native speakerism that people are so up in arms over. Is it more challenging for a non-native speaker to get an English language teaching job? Yeah, maybe, sometimes. Is it impossible for a non-native speaker of English to get an English language teaching job? No, it's not. Absolutely not. Yes, it's harder. Is it impossible? No. Why is it harder? Because the demand is there for the native speaking teachers. Now we can go into a whole bunch of reasons why that is, but I'll leave that for another video. Let me know in the comments below, what are your thoughts on this question? Okay, without further ado, let's jump into this fascinating conversation between Jordan Peterson and John McWhorter, and I'll offer my comments as we watch along.
Very pleased to have you come and agree to talk to me today, and I'm very much looking forward to our conversation.
Me too, Jordan.
So I'm going to start by revealing my ignorance. What I don't know about linguistics could fill a lot more books than you've written, even though you've written many. And so I'm curious about why if you could provide the watchers and listeners with a description of the field and its relevance, and also perhaps why you got interested in it, attracted by it, enough to devote your life to it.
Mm-hmm. Linguistics is a cover term for an awful lot of perspectives, but it's not about translation, and it's not about learning how to speak languages. It's about analyzing language as a scientific object. And a lot of it is a lot like biology. And so we analyze how language changes. What are the physiological processes that allow us to produce language and that allow us to understand it? How is it that children learn language? There's a certain magic that anybody can perceive in the way it happens with so little explicit tutelage. Linguists study that. And there are all sorts of other applications. There is linguistics and how to teach a computer to understand and even produce language. There is language and the social sphere, language as part of a culture's anthropology. What probably would surprise many people for very understandable reasons is that what I just mentioned is not my main focus. I can talk about those things on TV, so to speak, because the general public is very interested in those things. But I'm actually a language change, language contact nerd. What interests me is why.
So I just want to stop at this juncture to focus in on what I thought was really illuminating from John McWorther right now. And he kind of gave us the idea that linguistics isn't one thing. It isn't just grammar and verbs and nouns and all of that stuff. Like, it's also a big element of anthropology. In fact, there are some academics who see anthropology as having three general wings, one which is linguistics, the other is sociology, and then the other which is archaeology. But even within the linguistics part of anthropology, he mentioned there about how language has an impact on society. And this is how I can understand where this kind of like activist approach to teaching English kind of comes in. People kind of can see themselves as, oh, I'm teaching language here, so I should be helping to form these people into the type of people that I think they should be formed into. However, I would always still respond and say, it's not your job. As teachers, we need to step back and realize it's not our place to tell a person what to think, what to say, how to say it, what to be worried about, what to be concerned about. It's our job to help them develop their language so that they can then, if they so choose, talk about those things. Or if not, if they only want to talk about the topics that they themselves are interested and passionate about, well, you have equipped them with the language to do that. Okay, let's get back to the video.
Why a language is different now than it was 500 years ago, and what happens when languages come together and create new languages and how that process operates. But when you do linguistics in the media, you're expected to be kind of chief cook and bottle washer, and a lot of what is discussed in the media.
It's a really nice idiom there, by the way. Chief cook and bottle washer. You're expected to be chief cook and bottle washer. I really like it. It's kind of like you're expected to be an expert in all things, right?
By linguists is what we call sociolinguistics, which is great stuff. There are people who really specialize in it. I'm just a popularizer of that particular subfield. But that's a quick cook's tour of what linguistics is and what in the world I'm doing in it.
And so what are your thoughts on that remarkable facility of children to learn language? I read, I think it was the Russian psychologist Vygotsky made a claim. He had this hypothesis he called zone of proximal development, which is, I suppose, the psychological place you are when you're learning something new and are engrossed by it, something like the idea of flow. And Vygotsky said that adults naturally speak to their children at a comprehension level that slightly exceeds their current grasp. They seem to do that automatically, even though that's an unbelievably complex thing to do. And that drags children along, to further the development of their language. This seems deep and instinctual. And what are your thoughts on propositions like Chomsky's, that there's something like a biological...
Okay, before we get into Chomsky, Vygotsky's proximal development idea is something which is everywhere in English language teaching. It forms one of the primary cornerstones of the communicative approach that we use in teaching language. In teaching English, we call it L+1, language +1. The language that the learner has, plus a wee little bit more. You don't want to give them a challenge which is too far beyond what they're capable of. You don't want to teach them the language they know already. And of course, you don't want to make things too easy for them that they're not learning anything. So you teach them at L+1. So that's why we say if you're in a B2 class, your level is actually B1 because you're going towards B2. It's the little bit above what your level actually is. Okay, let's see what he says about Noam Chomsky.
So, and what are your thoughts on propositions like Chomsky's, that there's something like a biological mechanism, a specialized biological mechanism that underlies our ability to learn language and to produce it? Is that also under your purview?
Okay, Chomsky is a titan in the world of linguistics. And if you read anything about linguistics, you can't help but run into Noam Chomsky. Now, just like John McWhorter, Noam Chomsky talks a lot about politics, a lot about sociology, a lot about all kinds of issues, but his academic prowess is as a linguist. He was with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So it's interesting how these linguists, are so focused on language, but also have a lot to say when it comes to societal issues. Let's see how John McWorther expands on the idea of universal grammar brought to us by Noam Chomsky and what he has to say to it, and then I'll give you my thoughts on it.
I wouldn't call it under my purview, but I find it very interesting to watch, kind of like you rubberneck at a car accident. The idea that there is...
I just have to stop John McWhorter again. He's so lyrical in his idiomatic language. Just like you rubberneck at a car accident. It's how you look at an accident as you drive by it. Nice one.
Is a universal grammar that we're born with and that underlies all languages is utterly fascinating. Only a true genius such as Chomsky could have come up with it. But the odd thing is that when you actually try to find what these universal grammar specifications are that could plausibly be encoded in our genes and be subject to natural selection, frankly, since the 1960s, I think most people who practice that way of looking at things would be hard put to tell those who aren't in the club what has been discovered, what we know now that we didn't know then, what would be useful for people in other fields to know. I find it to be a subfield of true geniuses treading water. And a lot of them would not want to hear that. And they're going to say that I don't know enough about it to say it. But, frankly, I think I do, because I pay a lot more attention to what they do than many people might think. And I'm always wishing that more would come out of it than does. And so I don't think it's that there is a grammar tree of some sort, even if encoded in some abstract way, that people are born with. The evidence of that wonderful notion simply hasn't been borne out. But it's obvious that there is some sort of genetic specification for the acquisition of and the use of language, because if there weren't one, we wouldn't be the only species who do it. There's clearly something, but I hate to say whatever it is much less interesting than there being this very intricate and suspiciously computer science-like universal grammar in our brains. Now, Vygotsky is always very interesting. And what he's getting at is that.
Okay, so just before John gets into Vygotsky's point of view there on the proximal development, L+1 idea, I just want to expand a little bit or offer a slightly different analogy than he offered there about there being like a tree of language. Kind of the idea of the universal grammar is that, yeah, as he said, we all have this kind of like, or Chomsky proposed, we all have this kind of ability. Some linguists refer to it as kind of like an organ, but, a metaphorical organ that we have that generates language. So, we all have the words up, down, left, right, I am, you are, we all have these words, but we're capable of combining those into completely novel utterances. That is an incredible insight. But as John says there, we haven't been able to identify exactly what that is in the lab. It's so fascinating, and I understand how he is so fascinated, because it's kind of like trying to identify consciousness or love or the soul or something that, we're all keenly aware of their existence in the real world. Yet, as they say, no surgeon has ever extracted any of those things. However, language, even more than those things, we can see it, and in some ways we can measure its effects in the real world. Like, as I'm making this video, I can see the waveform of the sound that I'm producing with my voice. But where the language comes from and what generates the language, that still is what remains a mystery. Okay, let's see what he has to say about Vygotsky.
And what he's getting at, universal grammar in our brains. Now, Vygotsky is always very interesting. And what he's getting at is that humans learn to talk when people around them are chattering away in such a way that, for example, an adult learner of the language finds absolutely confounding. You just listen to this stream of things going by, even if you've been carefully instructed in the language. It's that grand nexus of frustration. And so certainly acquisition is not teaching children word by word by word, but acquisition is also not children filling out some sort of sentence parsing grammar that they were born with. It's something that's much less precise than that. Nevertheless,
and what John is saying here, again, we can see a huge influence of these words on what we do as teachers. Let me put it in very clear terms. We don't only teach grammar, because if we only taught grammar, then you might end up with grammatically correct sentences that don't really make any sense or are not natural. We don't only teach speaking or reading because you want to give students the tools so that they can generalize and generate their own language. So that's why you would teach grammar. So we teach both of these things. We don't only teach lexis because students need to know how the words go together to form sentences. Sometimes we also teach functional language. We need to teach pronunciation. We teach reading, writing, speaking, listening. We teach all of the things.
So not children filling out some sort of sentence parsing grammar that they.
So that's why, as John says, it's not children filling out these sentence parsing grammar. We need to give a more holistic language instruction.
They were born with. It's something that's much less precise than that. Nevertheless, what's amazing is how universally it works. All cognitively normal human beings learn to speak fluidly, fluently, idiomatically, and without effort. Obviously, that's programmed in some way.
So this is a crucial point, and it kind of goes back to the idea of native speakerism. Like, all children learn to speak idiomatically. I just want to focus on that point. Yes, we teach idioms as part of language acquisition or language lessons, and some of my friends who are non-native speakers and who are teachers, they use this kind of language with a kind of expertise which I'm constantly astounded by. However, just like with those people's own first languages, there are cultural influences on the reasons why you say things a certain way or why they're even said at all. One such example that comes to my mind is an expression which is not universal across all speakers of English, but a large subsection, I would say, particularly around the United Kingdom and Ireland, where I'm originally from, which is a phrase that goes like this: don't mention the war. Okay? And don't mention the war, you know, the idea of it basically means, oh, don't talk about that thing that, you know, we should stay quiet about such and such a subject. You know, it might be kind of controversial topic. And maybe you could probably figure out, well, maybe there was some war and people shouldn't talk about it. That's probably the background of it. But actually, the background of it is from an episode of Fawlty Towers, which was a sitcom in the 1970s, 1980s, produced in the UK, primarily by John Cleese of the Monty Python fame. And he has this iconic, hilarious, very, by 2022 standards, not politically correct, but believe me, it's hilarious. You should watch it. It's fantastic. And one of the iconic lines from this particular episode was, don't mention the war. And the hilarity that ensued from this utterance by John Cleese in the episode had such an impact on people living in those times that it even permeates across the decades still to this day.
Will you please call your wife immediately?
Sybil! She's in the hospital, you silly girl!
Yes, call her there.
I can't! I've got too much to do. Listen, don't mention the war. I mentioned it once, but I think I got away with it all right. So, it's all forgotten now, and let's hear no more about it. So that's 2 egg mayonnaise, a prawn Goebbels, a Hermann Goring, and 4 colded salads. No, wait a minute, I got a bit confused here. Sorry, I got a bit...
And it has now become a part of our idiomatic language. So this kind of insight and detail, maybe there's a moment where native speakerism has value. I'm not saying that native speakers are better than non-native speakers. I always say that I learned all about teaching pronunciation from one of my Polish colleagues, one of my best friends, one of the teachers who I admire the most in my life. I was trained to be a CELTA teacher trainer by a Danish man who, to this day, still inspires me with his level of English, his insights on teaching, and just the kind of person he was, a wonderful person. But we shouldn't just say native speaker or non-native. It's the same thing. It's not.
It's quite remarkable if you look at people who are quite intellectually impaired. So people who suffer from Down syndrome, for example, they also pick up language extraordinarily well. And that's very remarkable.
Okay, so that's it for this video, my watch along with Jordan Peterson and John McWhorter. Please let me know what you thought down in the comments below. I know I touched on some somewhat controversial areas there. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you agree a lot? Do you disagree a lot? Do you think that this is really just a big mountain out of a molehill? Or do you think that it's an important conversation that really needs to be had? So that's it for today's video. I hope you found it useful. Please do drop me a comment below, and thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye for now. If you need extra help with your CELTA course, or if you're preparing for a language exam such as IELTS or the Cambridge Advanced or the Cambridge Proficiency, please contact me for consultations at fergustrainer@gmail.com. That's FERGUSTRAINER@gmail.com. I look forward to hearing from you.